Today I'm going to show you how to start throwing on your pottery wheel at home. So I have this piece of clay here. This is a very large piece of clay. It is 2 pounds of clay. This is what is included in your clay kit. So I'm going to show you about how much to take from this to get started. This amount of clay is too big for this wheel. You may use something like this on the wheels at school, but for the sake of working at home with your toy pottery wheel, you will want to cut a much smaller piece.
So in order to cut the clay, I'm going to use my wire clay cutter, or in this case, I'm going to use a piece of fishing line, just like the one that you have in your clay kit. When I use the wire to cut, I'm going to pull straight toward myself, cutting through the clay. And for this demonstration, I'm going to use about 1/8 of this piece of clay. So that leaves you with a little tiny piece of clay. The reason that I want you to work so small is because this particular wheel can only withstand a certain amount of weight, and the amount of pressure that you will be applying could damage the wheel if you use a larger piece of clay. Before you put your clay on top of the wheel, you'll want to form it into a ball. So you could roll it, but I prefer to pat it into a ball shape.
Now, if I just like press it on here, it's not going to stay. So I want to really force it down. All right, so that that force kind of makes it stick to the wheel. Before I begin, I'm also going to just kind of blend this in.
Before I get too far into my demonstration, I want to emphasize the importance of water. Water is necessary in ensuring that the clay slips through your hands and doesn't cause friction and fly off. So it's important that you have a significant amount of water nearby. Now, I'm not going to use all of the water that I have here, but I am going to use it frequently, and I'm going to be reapplying it either with my fingers or with the sponge that is to my right.
So I'm going to show you how to create a pot that has the ideal form. And the ideal pot is going to have even thickness. It's going to have the same shape on the inside as it does on the outside. It would be symmetrical, and it would be lightweight. So there's a few steps to go through. Those steps are centering, flattening, opening, lifting, and then forming your pot. So I'm going to walk you through those steps today. So in order to begin, I want to make sure that the clay is nice and wet. So I'm just going to take a little bit of water here, and it's good and stuck on there so it's not going anywhere. And I want to also make sure that I have access to water on my hands. I'm going to switch my wheel on now.
The first step is centering. In order to center, I'm going to push the clay forward. Normally with a bigger piece of clay, I would use the heel of my hand to center, but this piece is too small, so I'm just going to use my fingertips, pushing the clay forward with my thumbs. When I start to push forward, the clay begins to change shape, getting taller as I push forward. As it gets taller, I start to close my fingers up toward the top, and it begins to make a cone shape. Starting out, I may want to bring the clay up a few times to create that cone shape. When I bring my fingers from the bottom to the top, I am easing up the pressure with more pressure down toward the bottom and less pressure as I get toward the top. Next, I'm going to bring that cone down and flatten it. I'm going to do that by putting pressure on the top of the cone using one hand and using another hand on the side to support it, so to prevent it from bending over. The hand that I use to push down or push in depends on the way that the wheel is spinning.
So normally a pottery wheel will spin in a counterclockwise direction. This wheel spins in a clockwise direction. So depending on the hand that you're used to using, your dominant hand, that would dictate your preference for the way that the wheel spins. My professional wheel does go in a counterclockwise direction. You always want the direction of the wheel to come through the palm of your hands. So if I'm imagining the bottom of this going through the palm of my hands, this would be, I'm right-handed, so I would be using this hand mostly. The direction of the wheel would come here. If you're left-handed, it's ideal if it comes the other way. Because we can't change the direction of this wheel, I'm going to be working on this side.
Because of the direction that this wheel spins, I'm going to use my right hand on the top to push down and my left hand on the side to push in, applying more water as I need it. If I don't have enough water on my clay, the clay will start to feel hot and it will start to resist my pressure. So I'm pushing down gently because I have such a small piece of clay, but I'm pushing down again with my right hand on the top and my left hand on the side pushing in. It's important during this step to take your time and go slowly. You always need to go slower than the wheel is spinning. At the end of this step, your clay should be shaped like a low, flat mound or a very, very tiny cheeseburger. Another name for this particular technique of bringing the clay up into a cone and pushing it down is called coning. The step of centering, where you're bringing the clay up and pushing it down, may need to be repeated a few times until your clay is truly in the center. The way that you know that your clay is centered is by resting your fingers on the outside of the clay while it's spinning. If your clay is not centered, your fingers might move around slightly, and if your clay is centered, your fingers would stay still. The next step in throwing on the wheel is flattening the mound of clay. A lot of times when you center, the clay will already be kind of flat, but it's important to take this step so that the next steps following go smoothly. So you can just take your fingertips and rest them on the top surface of the clay and apply a little bit of pressure. You may also take your fist and apply pressure with your fist. Another word for flattening the clay is compression. The next step in throwing on the wheel is opening up your pot. You can do that by taking your fingertip and simply resting it on the surface of the clay. As the wheel spins, your fingertip will make an indentation on the surface of the clay. It's important that this hole starts in the middle. If it's not in the middle, the steps that follow this will be off center. The next phase in opening up your clay is to make the hole a little bit deeper, and you're going to do that just by taking your fingertip and pressing straight down. One thing to be aware of when you perform this step is not to poke down too far. If you poke down too far, you will put a hole in the bottom of your pot, which would then result in having a bottomless pot. Now that I have my hole created, I want to start to open it up. I'm going to do that by creating a hook with my finger, hooking it right inside the hole that I've already created, and then pulling straight toward myself. I want to do this step very slowly. Remember that you always want to move slower than the wheel is moving, and I want to make sure I have plenty of water on my hands. That's about as far wide as I want to go on this pot. You don't want to go past the width of the entire pot itself. Moving on to the next step of lifting, I want to be aware of which hand is on the outside and which hand is on the inside. So remember, we were talking about the direction that the wheel is spinning and how that affects which hands you're using. Well, now my left hand is on the outside and my right hand is on the inside. My left hand is on the outside digging in and lifting up, and my right hand is on the inside supporting. My two hands are working together as a team in this step. So again, my left hand is on the outside digging in and lifting. My right hand is on the inside preventing the walls from caving in. You'll notice that my pot starts to get a little bit off center here, and that's because my fingers were resting on the rim. So anything that happens to your pot while you're working that doesn't feel right is happening because your hands did it. To fix it, I'm just going to take my wire and I'm going to let the wheel spin around, and I'm just going to remove that lip that I don't want on my pot. To continue the step of lifting, I'm going to take my finger in the sponge, dig in on the outside, and continue to support on the inside, this time being a little more conscious of where my fingers on my right hand are and what they are affecting. This step is also an important one to take slowly. Throughout all of these steps, I am making sure to keep my hands still. It's very easy to let the clay move your hands around, but you should always consciously keep your hands still. All of the steps leading up to this point have created this cylinder, which is a symmetrical form, and it has the qualities of an ideal pot. I could end the process here, but I want to continue and show you how to create a different form and add volume to the pot. All forms start out as a cylinder, and then they can become more complex the more you work with them. So this last step will help you to create a more complex form. First, I want to focus on areas that I want to be wider, and I'm going to do that by pressing from the inside out with gentle pressure with my right hand on the inside. To create a more narrow area on the pot, I'm going to do what's called collaring, where I take my fingertips and I gently press inward. You have to be careful with collaring because the clay loves to stretch out, but it does not love to get pushed back into shape. So be gentle when collaring, and if your clay starts to ripple, know that it is at its limit. So now you've seen all of the steps: center, flatten, open, lift, and form. I'm going to finish this piece by trimming off the excess clay that you can see at the bottom of the wheel. I'm going to do this by using an angled wooden tool. If you do not have an angled wooden tool, you may use a popsicle stick, and you can cut the tip of it so that it comes to a point. I'm taking that point and I'm digging it into the very bottom of the pot that I created, and it's removing the clay that's stuck to the wheel and also to the pot. So in essence, I am releasing this pot from the wheel. Next, I'm going to take my wire, I'm going to hold it flush with the wheel head and drag it underneath the pot to remove my pot from the wheel. I'm going to finish by cleaning off my hands, taking the clay pot off of the wheel and then cleaning the rest of the wheel. I want to make sure that there's no water inside my clay pot, so I may dump it, if there's any in there, I may dump it into my container.